The heat off the tarmac at Al Udeid was a physical presence, a shimmering wall that distorted the shapes of hangars and turned the distant dunes into molten waves. It smelled of scorched sand, vaporized jet fuel, and ozone. Inside the climate-controlled chill of the briefing room for the 77th Experimental Tactics Squadron, the air was thick with a different kind of pressure, the rarefied atmosphere of ego and ambition. This was the home of the F-12 Wraith program, the bleeding edge of aerospace technology, and its pilots were gods in their own minds. Major Eva Rostova stood near the back, a ghost in their midst. Her flight suit was a generation older than theirs, faded at the seams, the fabric softened by 1,000 cycles of wear and washing. At 48, she was a relic in a room where the average age was 32. The callsign patch on her shoulder was blank, a stark white square where a name should be. She had been assigned as a senior systems liaison, a title so nebulously bureaucratic it was an open invitation for mockery. The squadron's lead pilot, Captain Jake Thorne, callsign Viper, held court by the holographic tactical display. He was everything one expected of a top-tier fighter jock, chiseled jaw, an easy predatory grin, and eyes that held the glint of unshakable self-assurance. He gestured at the sleek matte black projection of the Wraith. "She's a beast," Thorne was saying, his voice resonating with proprietary pride. "The neural link is twitchy, and the plasma conduits still run hot, but once you get her in the groove, she disappears. From radar, from thermal, from everything. You're not flying a jet, you're piloting a phantom." A few of the junior pilots, all sharp angles and restless energy, nodded in agreement. One of them, a lieutenant named Chen, caught sight of Rostova. He nudged his wingman, a cocky captain named Diaz. "Look at the new liaison," Chen murmured, his voice a low current of derision. "Think they pulled her out of a museum?" Diaz snorted. "Probably here to make sure our paperwork is in order. Don't want to smudge the forms while we're breaking the sound barrier." Rostova heard them. She always heard. Her expression didn't flicker. Her gaze remained on the holographic jet, her eyes tracing lines no one else saw. The subtle flaws in the aerodynamic modeling, the vulnerability of the ventral sensor array, the dangerous asymmetry in the thrust vectoring. She had seen schematics like these before, scribbled on blackboards in windowless rooms deep in the Nevada desert, long before these pilots were old enough to shave. Thorne finished his impromptu briefing and turned, his eyes sweeping the room with the casual arrogance of a king surveying his court. They landed on Rostova. He paused, his grin tightening into a look of dismissive appraisal. He strode over, the younger pilots parting for him like acolytes. "Major," he said, the rank a courtesy, the tone anything but. "Rostova, is it? Read your file. Impressive. For a logistics officer." He was baiting her. It was a test, a dominance play common among men who measured their worth in G-forces and kill ratios. Rostova met his gaze. Her eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, the color of a winter sky, and they held a stillness that was unnerving. "I'm here to observe the Wraith's operational integration, Captain," she said, her voice low and even, devoid of any emotional inflection. It was a voice accustomed to being listened to, not one that fought for attention. "Observe," Thorne repeated, savoring the word. "Right. Well, feel free to observe from the gallery. The simulator is fully booked for the foreseeable future. We can't have non-essential personnel taking up valuable stick time." He smiled, a flash of white teeth. "Wouldn't want you to strain yourself. I hear the interface can be intense. Causes nosebleeds in pilots half your age." The dismissal was absolute. A door slammed shut in her face. He wasn't just questioning her ability. He was erasing the possibility of it. To him, she was a piece of administrative furniture, a woman past her prime sent to a forward base to collect a pension. He turned his back on her, a final, unspoken insult, and returned to his circle of admirers. "All right, boys," Thorne announced, clapping his hands together. "Let's go punch some holes in the sky." The pilots filed out, a river of bravado and Nomex, leaving Rostova alone in the sudden silence of the briefing room. The holographic Wraith still spun slowly in the center of the room, a perfect, deadly machine. She watched it, her face a mask of placid neutrality. But inside, a familiar coldness settled in her gut. Not anger, not frustration. It was the icy calm of a predator that has learned, over a very long time, the virtue of patience. They saw a relic, a ghost. They had no idea how right they were. Over the next week, the dismissal became institutionalized. Rostova was a shadow moving through the base, present but unseen. In the hangar, she would stand for hours, watching the ground crews swarm over the two F-12 prototypes. Her presence was a silent, unnerving thing. The crew chiefs, taking their cues from Thorne, gave her curt nods and avoided eye contact. She asked questions. Quiet, insightful queries about the hydraulic fluid's viscosity under extreme temperatures, the refresh rate of the sensor fusion display, the fail-safes on the exotic matter reactor. Her questions were too specific, too knowledgeable for a logistics officer. They made the engineers uncomfortable. They would answer in clipped technical jargon, trying to baffle her with complexity, but she would just nod slowly, a flicker of understanding in her pale eyes that they couldn't quite decipher. The simulator became Thorne's exclusive domain. From the observation deck, Rostova watched him fly. She had to give him credit. He was good. His reflexes were phenomenal, his command of the complex systems instinctive. He pushed the simulated Wraith to its absolute limits, flying daring, high-risk maneuvers that left the monitoring technicians breathless. But Rostova saw the flaws. He was a brute force pilot. He overpowered the aircraft, bending it to his will through sheer aggression and reaction time. He didn't listen to it. He didn't feel the subtle vibrations through the control column, the faint hum of an overstressed capacitor, the almost imperceptible lag in the neural link as the flight computer struggled to keep up with his violent inputs. He was dancing with the machine, but he didn't know the steps. He was leading, and the Wraith was a partner that did not like to be led. One afternoon, she approached the simulator bay. The door was propped open, and the lead technician, a weary-looking master sergeant named Elias Vance, was running diagnostics. He was General Vance's nephew, a fact he tried to keep quiet, a good soldier trying to make his own way. Elias was one of the few who treated her with a measure of professional courtesy. "Afternoon, Major," he said, not looking up from his console. "Sergeant," she replied, her voice soft. "I was hoping for a window. 30 minutes is all I need, just to familiarize myself with the energy management system." Before Elias could answer, a voice cut through the air. "The simulator's offline for a systems flush, Major." Thorne stood in the doorway, still in his flight suit, helmet under his arm. His hair was damp with sweat. He had just finished another grueling session. His eyes were hard, his jaw set. It was a lie, and they both knew it. The diagnostics on Elias's screen showed the system was green across the board. Elias looked from Thorne to Rostova, his expression caught between military protocol and his own judgment. Thorne was the star pilot, the program's golden boy. Rostova was the unknown, the paper pusher. The choice was simple. "Sorry, ma'am," Elias mumbled, finally looking away from his screen. "Captain's orders. He's the lead test pilot. His call." Thorne stepped fully into the room, positioning himself between Rostova and the simulator cockpit. It was a clear physical barrier, a line drawn in the sand. "Like I said, Major, we can't have non-essential personnel interfering with the program's readiness. This isn't a video game arcade. The Wraith is a finely tuned weapon, and my pilots need every available second to master it. Your familiarization is not a priority." The condescension was thick enough to taste. He was speaking to her as if she were a curious civilian who had wandered into a restricted area. The insult was layered, aimed at her age, her gender, her supposed role. He was making an example of her for anyone else who might question his authority. Rostova's gaze drifted past him to the sleek black clamshell of the simulator cockpit. She could almost feel the cold metal of the throttle, the hum of the active feedback systems through the stick. She knew that machine. Not just from the schematics, she knew its soul because she had helped forge it. She looked back at Thorne. There was no anger in her eyes, only a profound, almost pitying clarity. She saw a young, talented pilot who had mistaken arrogance for confidence, aggression for skill. A pilot who had never faced a situation that his reflexes and his technology couldn't solve. A pilot who had never truly been afraid. "Understood, Captain," she said, her voice a flat, calm C. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned and walked away, her back straight, her steps measured. Thorne watched her go, a smirk playing on his lips. He had won. He had put the old woman in her place. He turned to Elias. Let's run the Canyon Dash simulation again. Sub-level 4. I think I can shave another 3 seconds off the record. Elias Vance watched Rostova's retreating figure, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He had seen the look in her eyes. It wasn't defeat. It was something else entirely, something that felt disturbingly like patience. He had a sudden, chilling thought that Captain Thorne hadn't won anything at all. He had just made a terrible, terrible mistake. The base commander, Colonel Madsen, was a man who navigated the treacherous currents of military politics with a simple philosophy. Don't rock the boat. The F-12 Wraith program was his ticket to a star, a high-profile, high-budget project that had the Pentagon's undivided attention. Captain Jake Thorne was the face of that program. He was the charismatic, supremely skilled pilot who looked great in press photos and could articulate the program's successes in sound bites that made generals smile. Madsen's job, as he saw it, was to keep Thorne happy and productive. He had summoned Rostova to his office. The space was meticulously ordered, the awards on the wall polished to a high sheen, the desk clear of all but a single, perfectly aligned data slate. It was the office of a man who valued control above all else. Major Rostova, Madsen began, not bothering to offer her a seat. He remained standing behind his desk, a barrier of mahogany and authority between them. I've received a report from Captain Thorne. He seems to be under the impression that you are attempting to interfere with his training schedule. I requested 30 minutes in the simulator to review the EMR subsystem, Colonel, Rostova stated, her tone purely factual. My directive is to liaise on systems integration. I can't do that effectively without hands-on analysis. Madsen picked up a stylus and tapped it against his data slate, a small, irritating rhythm. Your directive, Major, is to provide analysis based on the data provided by the active-duty test pilots. Captain Thorne is that pilot. His feedback, his data, is your raw material. Your job is to process it, not to generate your own. We have a very clear chain of command here and a very specific mission protocol. It was a masterful piece of bureaucratic stonewalling. He was defining her role into a corner, making her a glorified secretary with Major's oak leaves. With respect, Colonel, Rostova said, her voice unwavering, the data logs don't show everything. They don't show the haptic feedback lag under high G maneuvers or the slight desynchronization in the neural link during inverted flight. You can only see those things from the cockpit. Madsen's tapping stopped. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. And you believe you would be able to identify these nuances? Your flight record, while extensive, is not current. The last time you were certified on a frontline fighter was over 15 years ago. The Wraith is a different animal entirely. It's more computer than aircraft. It requires a pilot who is fused with the technology, not one who remembers flying with steam gauges. The insult was more subtle than Thorne's, but cut just as deep. He was dismissing her entire career, her decades of experience, as obsolete. He was relegating her to history. Technology changes, Colonel, Rostova said, a hint of steel entering her voice for the first time. The laws of physics do not. Aerodynamics are aerodynamics. A stall is still a stall. A pilot's instinct for what an airframe can and cannot do is not something that becomes obsolete. Instinct, Madsen scoffed, a small, derisive smile touching his lips. We're trying to eliminate the need for instinct, Major. This program is about creating a perfect synthesis of man and machine, a system so advanced that human error is factored out. What we need are pilots with the reflexes of a hummingbird and the processing power of a supercomputer. We need Captain Thorne. What we don't need is a consultant, second-guessing the process and getting in the way. The message was clear. Stay in your lane. Do not challenge the star player. Do not make waves for the coach. So I am to be barred from the simulator entirely? Rostova asked, her gaze direct and unflinching. Captain Thorne has full authority over the operational training assets of his squadron. That includes the simulators, Madsen confirmed, his tone final. If he deems your presence a distraction, then I will support his decision. His performance is paramount to the success of this program. And the success of this program, Major, is paramount to this base. Am I understood? Rostova held his gaze for a long moment. The polished surface of the desk reflected the harsh fluorescent lights above. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. She could fight this. She could go over his head, pull rank, cite her actual mission parameters. It would create a storm of political infighting, bog the program down in reviews, and make her position untenable. It would be a messy, ugly battle. And it wasn't her way. Her way was to wait for the moment when the system, in its arrogance, failed. The moment when the perfect pilot and the perfect machine met a problem that was not in their perfect plan. "Perfectly, Colonel," she said at last. She gave him a crisp, correct salute, turned on her heel, and walked out of the office. Madsen watched her go, feeling a surge of satisfaction. He had handled the situation, protected his asset, and reinforced the chain of command. He had put the old woman in her box. He sat down at his desk, confident that the problem was solved. He, like Thorne, had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He assumed he was dealing with a disgruntled officer. He had no idea he had just dismissed the very architect of the storm that was coming. The crisis arrived not with a bang, but with a crackle of static over a secure channel. A reconnaissance drone, a high-value asset carrying sensitive intelligence on enemy anti-air emplacements, had been hit by a lucky shot from a next-generation surface-to-air missile. It wasn't destroyed, but its primary propulsion was gone. It had crash-landed deep within the Zagros Mountains, a jagged spine of rock and ice that formed the border of a hostile, non-permissive state. The drone's self-destruct mechanism had failed. Its data core, containing targeting information that could cripple the entire region's defense network, was intact and vulnerable. Compounding the problem was the weather. A synoptic anomaly, a weather bomb, was exploding over the mountains. It was a swirling vortex of cyclonic winds, sub-zero temperatures, and extreme electrical interference. Hurricane-force updrafts and downdrafts created air pockets that could tear the wings off a conventional aircraft. The electromagnetic chaos generated by the storm was so intense, it would blind any standard avionics and guidance systems. It was a digital and physical wall. In the command center, the mood was grim. General Vance's face was projected on the main screen, his expression carved from granite. "Losing that data core is not an option," his voice boomed, cutting through the low hum of the servers. "That intel is critical for Operation Nightfall. We get it back. Today." Colonel Madsen stood stiffly at the tactical table. "General, a ground team is impossible. The terrain is impassable, and they wouldn't get there before the enemy does. A standard air recovery is out of the question. The storm is unprecedented. No F-16 or F-22 could survive those conditions." "I'm not interested in what we can't do, Colonel," Vance growled. "I'm interested in solutions." All eyes in the room turned to Captain Thorne. He stood tall, his jaw set. This was his moment. This was what the F-12 Wraith was built for, a mission no one else could do. "The Wraith can do it, General," Thorne said, his voice ringing with confidence. "Its stealth will get it past their border detection, and the plasma drives should be able to handle the wind shear. I can get in, use the low-altitude hover to have the ground team fast rope down, secure the core, and get out before they even know I was there." Madsen nodded eagerly. "Captain Thorne is our best shot, General." There was a pause. On the screen, Vance's eyes seemed to drill into Thorne. "It's your call, son. But know this, you will have no support. Comms will be spotty at best, your guidance systems will be unreliable, you'll be flying on stick and rudder, and God's good grace." "That's all I need, sir," Thorne said, a confident smirk touching his lips. An hour later, the Wraith, designated Wraith 1, lifted off the runway. It didn't roar like a conventional jet. It hissed, a whisper of immense power as it climbed almost vertically into the bruised, darkening sky. In the command center, they watched its icon on the tactical display, a single hopeful point of light moving toward the maelstrom on the horizon. Rostova watched from the back of the room, a silent observer. She had seen the meteorological data. She knew what was waiting in those mountains. It wasn't just wind and ice. It was chaos incarnate. She had also seen the readouts from Wraith 1's final systems check. a slight fluctuation in the port plasma conduit regulator. A diagnostic footnote, dismissed by the ground crew as within acceptable parameters. But she knew it was a symptom of a deeper problem, a weakness the storm would find and exploit. For 20 minutes, the mission went perfectly. Thorne's icon slipped past the enemy's early warning radar net like a ghost. He was masterful, a phantom dancing on the edge of detection. Then, he hit the storm wall. The feed from his helmet cam became a blizzard of static. His voice, when it came through, was strained, punctuated by sharp, ragged breaths. Encountering extreme turbulence. My God. The telemetry data streaming back to the command center went haywire. Altitude readings fluctuated by thousands of feet per second. Airspeed indicators spun wildly. Warning lights flashed across the technicians' consoles like a Christmas tree from hell. "Viper, report," Madsen barked into his microphone. "The neural link is flickering." Thorne's voice was tight with strain. "Flight controls. Unresponsive. The storm it's trying to tear the plane apart." On the main screen, they saw a terrifyingly brief, clear image from the helmet cam. The world outside the cockpit was a nightmare of swirling gray and black, lashed by lightning. The canopy was covered in a sheet of ice. Inside, red warning lights pulsed, casting a demonic glow on Thorne's face. His eyes were wide, not with confidence, but with the dawning horror of a man who had completely lost control. "The port engine is flaming out," he yelled. "The regulator failed. It's... Oh, God." A violent lurch, a scream of tortured metal, and then the feed went dead. The icon for Wraith 1 on the tactical map froze, then blinked red, then vanished. Silence descended on the command center. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of failure. Colonel Madsen stared at the blank screen, his face pale. The invincible pilot and his perfect machine had been swatted out of the sky by a force of nature. After a heart-stopping 30 seconds, a new icon appeared, moving slowly, erratically, away from the storm. Wraith 1 was still airborne, but it was crippled. Thorne's voice came back weak and shaken. "Mayday, mayday! Port plasma conduit is offline. I've lost half my control surfaces. I'm fighting to keep her level. I'm coming home." The mission was a catastrophic failure. The drone corps was still out there, and now their only asset capable of reaching it was either crippled or gone. The weight of defeat pressed down on everyone in the room, everyone except Major Rostova. She hadn't moved. Her expression was unchanged. She was still watching, still waiting. Her moment had arrived. The doors to the command center hissed open, and Captain Thorne stumbled in. He had managed to land the wounded Wraith, a feat of raw skill and desperation that had shredded the jet's landing gear and nearly torn off a wing. His flight suit was dark with sweat, his face ashen. The swagger was gone, replaced by the haunted look of a man who had stared into the abyss and seen it stare back. He leaned heavily against the tactical table, his hands shaking. "It's impossible," he rasped, his voice raw. "The storm. It's not just wind. It's alive. The electromagnetic fields. They play hell with the Wraith systems. The flight computer couldn't compensate. It was trying to make 1,000,000 micro-adjustments a second and just fried itself. I was flying a brick." Colonel Madsen looked at the grim faces around him. The window to retrieve the data core was closing. Enemy patrols would be swarming the crash site within the hour. "What about Wraith 2? Madsen asked, a note of desperation in his voice. An engineer shook his head. "Sir, it would be a suicide mission. The exact same thing would happen. The aircraft's design is fundamentally vulnerable to that specific type of EM interference. We'd need to rewrite the entire flight control software, and that would take weeks." "We don't have weeks," Vance's voice thundered from the main screen. "We have minutes. That core cannot fall into enemy hands. Find me a solution." A heavy, hopeless silence fell over the room. The best pilot had failed. The most advanced aircraft in the world had failed. There were no other options. Into that silence, a single calm voice spoke. "There is one." Every head turned. Major Eva Rostova stepped forward from the shadows at the back of the room. She moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, her worn flight suit a stark contrast to the high-tech gleam of the command center. She walked to the holographic display. which now showed the swirling vortex of the storm, a digital monument to their failure. Thorne looked up, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. You? What are you going to do, file a strongly worded report? Rostova ignored him. Her attention was on Colonel Madsen. Wraith 2 is operational, she stated, not asked. It's a death trap, Major, the engineer interjected. I just told you the systems can't handle the storm. The automated systems can't, Rostova corrected him, her voice level. The pilot can. She tapped a command into the console. A schematic of the F-12's cockpit appeared. You can manually decouple the primary flight computer from the control surfaces. It's a maintenance override, buried 3 layers deep in the diagnostic menu. The engineer stared at her, dumbfounded. That would disable every flight assist, the stability augmentation, the G-limiter, the neural link, everything. The airframe is inherently unstable. No human could fly it like that. The reaction time required is physically impossible. Not impossible, Rostova said softly. Just difficult. A wave of incredulous murmuring swept the room. Thorne pushed himself off the table, his face flushed with anger and indignation. This is insane, he spat. She's not even a pilot. She's a goddamn glorified desk jockey. She hasn't flown in years. You want to send her in a $1 billion experimental jet she's never even sat in, into a storm that nearly killed me? You're out of your mind. I forbid it, Madsen declared, finding his voice. He stepped forward, placing himself between Rostova and the command console. As commander of this base, I will not authorize this. It's a waste of a valuable asset and, frankly, a human life. The mission is a wash. We'll have to deal with the fallout. Rostova's pale blue eyes met Madsen's. There was no pleading in them, no defiance, just a calm, unshakable certainty. You are making a mistake, Colonel. My decision is final, Major, Madsen snapped. Security, escort the Major back to her quarters. 2 airmen moved hesitantly towards her. The tension in the room was electric. It was a standoff, a battle of wills. And then the voice of God spoke. Stand down, Colonel. General Vance's voice from the main screen was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. Every person, including Madsen and Thorne, froze. General? Madsen said, confused. Surely you don't condone this recklessness? Vance's image on the screen seemed to zoom in, his eyes fixing on Rostova. For the first time, a new expression was on the general's face. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was something else entirely. Respect. Madsen, you have a living legend standing in your command center, and you're treating her like a clerk, Vance said, his voice laced with an irony so sharp it could draw blood. You're all looking at her service record. You see the dates, the administrative postings. You're not seeing the whole picture. You can't, because most of it is blacked out, sealed in a vault a mile beneath Cheyenne Mountain. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Thorne stared at Rostova, a flicker of confusion warring with his anger. Vance's gaze was still locked on Rostova. He spoke to her now, his voice softening with a familiarity that shocked everyone in the room. It's been a long time, Nix. The name fell into the silence like a stone into a deep well. Nix. A call sign from a ghost program, a myth whispered about in hushed tones by old intelligence officers. A pilot who flew experimental aircraft in the dead of night, testing technologies that weren't supposed to exist. A pilot who had officially died in a training accident 20 years ago. Thorne's jaw went slack. Nix? That's a myth, a boogeyman story they tell rookie pilots. She's no myth, Captain, Vance said, his voice turning to cold iron. He looked back at the stunned faces of Madsen and Thorne. You want to know why she understands the Wraith's flight systems? You want to know why she knows about a maintenance override that even your chief engineer missed? The general leaned closer to his camera, his voice dropping to a low, powerful growl that filled the room and silenced every thought. She wrote the damn book. The 4 words hung in the air, resonating with the force of a physical blow. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the command center. The low hum of the servers seemed to fade away. The blinking lights on the consoles seemed to freeze. In that moment, the entire world reoriented itself around the quiet woman in the faded flight suit. She wrote the damn book. The revelation was a paradigm shift. It shattered every assumption, every dismissive glance, every condescending word that had been thrown at her. Major Eva Rostova, the relic, the paper pusher, the museum piece, was not just a pilot. She was the pilot. Colonel Madsen's face, which had been a mask of rigid authority, crumbled into slack-jawed astonishment. He stared at Rostova as if seeing her for the first time. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her unnervingly precise questions to the engineers, her quiet confidence, her intimate knowledge of the Wraith's most esoteric functions. She wasn't observing the program, she was auditing it. She was its creator, its godmother, come to see what the children had done with her legacy. Jake Thorne felt a cold dread wash over him, a chilling realization of his own monumental arrogance. He had mocked her. He had barred her from the simulator. He had called her a desk jockey. He had stood in front of the woman who had pioneered the very technology he flew, the woman whose forgotten research notes were the foundation of his own celebrated skill, and treated her with utter contempt. The memory of his own words burned in his ears. He felt like a fool, a small, arrogant child who had tried to lecture a grandmaster on how to play chess. General Vance's voice broke the spell. The aircraft she flew, Project Chimera, was the forerunner to the Wraith. It was an unstable, unassisted airframe with a raw neural interface. There were no safety protocols, no flight assists, just the pilot and the machine. She flew it for over 500 hours, in conditions that would make that little storm of yours look like a summer shower. She wrote the book on manual reversion, on flying an unstable craft through catastrophic systems failure. It's not just a manual, Colonel. It's her biography, written in hydraulic fluid and telemetry data. He paused again, his gaze sweeping over the dumbstruck faces. Now, I ask you again, is there anyone in that room better qualified to fly Wraith 2 into that storm? The question was rhetorical. The answer was a deafening silence. Madsen, his face pale, slowly turned to Rostova. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep deferential respect. Major, I apologize. The aircraft is yours. Rostova simply nodded, her expression unchanged. The vindication was irrelevant. The apologies were unnecessary noise. All that mattered was the mission. She turned to the stunned engineer. I need you to get Wraith 2 prepped, full fuel load, and I want you to activate Diagnostic Override Sequence 7 Alpha 4. It will give me direct manual control of the plasma conduit regulators. I'll handle the power fluctuations myself. The engineer, who moments before had declared the mission impossible, now scrambled to comply, his fingers flying across his console. Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am. The word ma'am was now imbued with a reverence that bordered on worship. Rostova started for the door, her stride purposeful. As she passed Thorne, he instinctively took a step back. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a humbling mix of shame and awe. Major, he began, his voice barely a whisper. She paused and looked at him. For the first time, she offered him a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply a recognition that the game had changed. Get your gear, Captain, she said, her voice crisp and clear. You're flying my wing, on the simulator. You're going to be my eyes and ears. Call out the energy spikes on the ground telemetry. You know the storm. I know the plane. We do this together. She wasn't punishing him. She wasn't rubbing his face in his failure. She was giving him a job. She was using him as a tool, a piece of equipment, just as she would use the jet. It was the most professional, most devastating, and most respectful thing she could have done. It acknowledged his skill while simultaneously cementing her absolute command. Thorne could only nod, mute with a profound sense of humility. He had started the day as the king. He was ending it as a squire, privileged to carry the shield of a true knight. As Rostova walked out towards the hangar, the entire command center staff, from the colonels to the airmen, watched her go, their mockery and dismissal replaced by a silent, bone-deep reverence for the ghost who had just come back from the dead. The atmosphere in Hangar 5 was electric. The ground crew, who had previously treated Rostova with polite indifference, now moved with a frantic, focused energy. Word had spread like wildfire. The quiet, older major wasn't just a liaison. She was Nyx. She was a legend. Every movement they made, every panel they checked, every line of fuel they pumped into Wraith 2 was now part of something historic. They were prepping a warhorse for a Valkyrie. Rostova walked through the hangar, her presence parting the controlled chaos like a ship through water. She didn't bark orders. She moved from station to station, speaking in low, calm tones to the crew chiefs. Her hands ran over the cold skin of the Wraith, her fingertips tracing panel lines, checking the seals on the cockpit canopy, her touch both intimate and diagnostic. She saw things they had missed, a tiny hydraulic leak, no bigger than a teardrop near the port aileron, a slight misalignment in a sensor housing. She pointed them out quietly, and the crews scrambled to correct them. Thorne arrived a few minutes later, dressed in a fresh flight suit. He moved with a new, uncharacteristic quietness, his usual swagger completely gone. He found Rostova near the nose of the aircraft, supervising the loading of the recovery gear. "Major," he said, his voice subdued. She looked up, her gaze steady. "Captain, report to the simulator bay. Elias Vance is waiting for you. He'll patch you into my comms in the jet's telemetry feed. I want you to monitor the storm's EM bands, call out the frequency shifts. I'll use them to anticipate the system failures instead of just reacting to them." "Yes, ma'am," Thorne said immediately. He paused, struggling for words. "About what I said before. You were arrogant," Rostova finished for him, her tone not accusatory, just factual. "You confuse talent with mastery. A common mistake. The sky has a way of correcting it. Be my eyes, Thorne. That's all I need from you right now." She turned back to the crew chief, the conversation over. The dismissal was absolute, but this time, it was earned. Thorne stood there for a moment, a man cut adrift from his own ego. Then, he squared his shoulders, a new look of grim determination on his face. He had a job to do. He turned and sprinted toward the command building. Rostova swung herself into the cockpit of Wraith 2 with the fluid economy of motion of someone who had done it 10,000 times. The cockpit was a claustrophobic egg of black glass and glowing holographic displays. To Thorne, it had felt like a high-tech extension of his own body. To Rostova, it felt like a familiar room filled with old friends. Her hands moved over the controls, her fingers dancing across touchscreens and flipping switches. She didn't need to look. Her muscle memory was encoded with the DNA of this place. She put on her helmet, and the world dissolved into the green-tinged clarity of the helmet-mounted display. The cacophony of the hangar was replaced by the low hum of the jet's auxiliary power unit and the hiss of the oxygen system. "Wraith 2 to tower, ready for taxi." Her voice was calm, a flat line on the emotional spectrum. "Tower copies, Wraith 2. The sky is yours." The voice of the air traffic controller was filled with an uncharacteristic awe. The canopy slid shut, sealing her in. The jet rolled out of the hangar, its movements unnervingly silent. As she taxied towards the runway, she passed the crippled form of Wraith 1, its skin scorched, its landing gear shattered, a monument to hubris. She lined up on the center line, the setting sun glinting off her canopy. "Tower, Wraith 2 is wheels up." She pushed the throttle forward. There was no roar, no thunderous kick, just a smooth, irresistible surge of power that pressed her back into her seat. The Wraith leaped off the runway, climbing at a breathtaking angle into the blood-red sky. Inside the command center, a hushed crowd was gathered around the main screen. General Vance was still patched in, his face an unreadable mask. Thorne was in the simulator, a live feed of his face in the corner of the screen, his eyes glued to the telemetry data streaming from Rostova's jet. "Entering the storm front," Rostova's voice announced, as calm as if she were ordering coffee. The view from her helmet cam plunged into a maelstrom. The sky vanished, replaced by a swirling, violent chaos of black and gray clouds, lit from within by strobing flashes of lightning. The jet began to buck and shudder, tossed about by winds that defied all meteorological models. "Warning," a synthesized voice announced in the cockpit. "Flight stability augmentation offline. EM spike, 300 gigahertz band, starboard side." Thorne's voice cut in, sharp and focused. "Copy that," Rostova replied. On the screen, they saw her hands move, her left hand dancing over a sub-panel, her right hand making a minute adjustment on the control stick. The jet steadied, plowing through the turbulence. Warning, neural interface desynchronized. Another spike, low frequency this time, directly ahead, Thorne called out. Compensating, Rostova said. She was flying the jet now, truly flying it, not with computers or assists, but with nerve and sinew and a lifetime of instinct. She wasn't fighting the storm, she was dancing with it. She felt its rhythms, its violent ebbs and flows, and adjusted, anticipated, and countered. She made the Wraith, this untamable, unstable beast of a machine, a part of her own body. She flew deeper into the mountains, navigating the treacherous canyons by the ghost light of the lightning, her display flickering and dying as waves of energy washed over the aircraft. She was flying blind, deaf and dumb, with only the feel of the airframe trembling through her fingertips to guide her. It was an impossible feat of aviation, a masterclass in pure, unadulterated skill. In the command center, no one breathed. They were witnessing something that would be spoken of in legends for decades to come. The arrogant young pilots who had mocked her stood humbled, their faces pale with the realization of the gulf that separated their own considerable talent from her transcendent mastery. I have visual on the target, Rostova's voice crackled. Through the static, they saw it. The broken shape of the drone, wedged in a snowy ravine. She brought the Wraith into a hover, a maneuver the engineers had said was impossible without computer assistance, holding it steady against winds that were tearing chunks of rock from the mountainside. Recovery team, you are clear to deploy, she said, her voice still impossibly calm. After a tense 3 minutes, the team was back aboard with the data core. Rostova pushed the throttle forward, and the Wraith clawed its way back into the sky, back into the heart of the storm. The return journey was just as brutal, but she flew with the same preternatural grace. As she cleared the storm front, the rising sun broke over the horizon, flooding the cockpit with brilliant gold light. The turbulence ceased, the jet suddenly smooth and silent. Below her, the desert stretched out, peaceful and serene. She landed Wraith 2 as gently as a falling leaf. When the canopy slid open, the morning air that filled the cockpit was cool and clean. She sat there for a long moment, the hum of the cooling engines the only sound. The ground crew and pilots stood waiting in a silent line on the tarmac. There were no cheers, no whoops of celebration. The moment was too profound for that. As she climbed down from the cockpit, her movements slightly stiff, Colonel Madsen stepped forward. He rendered the sharpest, most sincere salute of his life. One by one, every other person on the tarmac, from the lowest-ranking airman to Captain Jake Thorne, followed suit. Rostova walked past them, her face impassive. She didn't acknowledge the salutes. She didn't need to. The respect was a palpable thing, a silent, powerful current that flowed from them to her. It had been earned not with words or rank, but with action, in the heart of a storm, alone in the dark. Her final stop was the quiet solitude of the maintenance bay. She picked up a clean rag and a can of solvent. Under the watchful, reverent eyes of a young crew chief, she began the post-flight ritual, wiping the grease and grime from a control linkage deep within the Wraith's engine housing. Her hands, scarred and sure, moved with methodical grace. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the hangar floor. The war was still on. There would be other missions, other battles. But for now there was only the quiet clink of metal on metal, the smell of solvent, and a ghost, finally seen, tending to her machine as the world held its breath in silent awe.